Today I'm going to talk about whether women and men can be best friends. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. I got a request to talk about this from a person by the name of Blake, who showed me a tweet exchange from Twitter, and said it didn't quite sit right, but he's not sure what to make of it, and wanted to know my thoughts. So, well, I hope this helps. The tweet exchange consists of, first there's a person by the name of Ari, who said, "I hate when people act like marriage is a death sentence, especially people my age. Like, dude, you don't want to spend your life with your best friend and raise a beautiful family? Sad." Or possibly SAD, in case that's an acronym that the kids are using these days I don't know about. Anyway, all caps, SAD. Anyway, and then somebody by the name of Charles Main quote tweeted this saying, "Women and men can never be best friends. This is a modern and degenerate idea." Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff to unpack here because these words and to some degree the concepts get used to mean a variety of things. And Twitter is a zero context environment, so I have no idea really what either of these people meant. And I'm not here trying to impute a meaning to them. That's why I'm going to discuss several different meanings to sort of unpack what is and is not possible and sensible and so on. Okay, so the first thing is the concept of friendship, because there are different things that are meant by best friend. That's kind of the key concept here. And so first we get to the idea of friendship. So going off of C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves, silly habit I have, I'm literally gesturing to it on my shelf, which is over there. That's why I'm gesturing there. C.S. Lewis's book, The Four Loves, in which he distinguishes the four types of love as the Greeks had words for, of agape, philos, eros, and storge. And agape, the love of God, generous love, pure gift, as Bishop Barron likes to define it, willing the good of the other as other. Although I think it's a little clearer to say willing the good of the other for their sake. But so that's agape. Storge is the love of the family, love of the familiar. So this is, everything should have agape as its sort of base, but there's sort of a love particular to the love of parent to child, which is not just, there is that generous love that's supposed to be there. But there's also sort of a love of being family members and of brothers and sisters to each other and so on. Okay, so that's that. Eros is love, husband and wife, erotic love. And then philos, that's the one we're really concerned with here. Philos, like you see in the word philosophia, Sophia meaning wisdom, philosophia, the love of wisdom, but it's love in that friendship sort of sense. The love of friends, C.S. Lewis describes it, if the position of lovers, in eros, is face to face, the position of friends is shoulder to shoulder. Friends together love some third thing outside of them. So this is very easy to see when you have two friends who enjoy woodworking. So they both together love fashioning wood, or two friends who love whatever, butterfly collecting, stamp collecting, whatever it is. They love this thing, and they love this thing together, sharing this love of that other thing outside of them together. Okay, so that's using that as friendship, and that is generally speaking what people mean when they talk about friendship, although usually they tend to mean it in sort of very trivial isn't quite the right word, but essentially trivial ways, or about trivial things like we both enjoy going on roller coasters, we both enjoy drinking whiskey, we both enjoy eating pizza together. So we both enjoy going to clubs and drinking whiskey and eating pizza. And so that is friendship. They both are enjoying these things that are outside of them. They're sharing their love together for that thing. There are much deeper, stronger loves. They're much better. There's a wide range of possible objects here. This is a simple one, but at the same time, these are good things. Pizza and whiskey and whatever. These are good. Dance music, etc. These are goods. There may be greater goods, but it's never good to denigrate a good for the sake of another good. So that's friendship. Now, obviously, men and women can be friends together. So in that sense, of friendship. Obviously, men and women can be friends. And if best friend is merely defined as somebody who, or the person with whom you share the greatest amount of love for another thing together, then yes, a man and woman can easily be best friends in that sense. And there's a sense, and I'm going to get to this in a little bit, I want to hold off on it. And there is a strong sense in which a husband and wife should be best friends in this sense. As I said, I'm going to hold off on that, though, for a little bit, and for a reason that will be clear soon. There is another concept that gets called friendship, especially in American English. It is somewhat distinct in like British English and Australian English, I believe, where you have the concept of a mate. This is a little bit confused because the term is also used somewhat generically. Like it can be used as if you don't know somebody's name, you might just call them mate. In place of a name to signify, I don't know your name, but I intend goodwill towards you. That's, sort of the most trivial usage possible, but when it's not used in that sort of fashion, it has a connotation above simply enjoying somebody's company of some amount of mutual reliance. There's a person you can ask favors from, and you would expect that they would want to help you, and they can ask favors from you and expect that you would want to help them. I don't want to overblow it. Checked within an actual Englishman, and so like it's not it's not like a super strong bond that's implied. It is a little bit more, or somewhat more than simply enjoying somebody's company, and so the older word comrade is, you see that like especially in the, like with the overtures of Comrade in Arms. I'm sorry, overtones of Comrade in Arms. That sort of comrade is a little bit more like what I'm getting at in this sort of sense, where that sense of an American English friend is, it's not merely somebody with whom you have philos, that you love them, and sort of the way in which you love them is you together with them love something, and that is the bond that you share to it. That sense of English sense mate, and even more like the older idea of comrade, has a sense, it's got a bond of mutual dependence to it. And not necessarily ordinary dependence, but more extraordinary dependence, that there are people with whom you have a relationship where in extraordinary circumstances you will be there for them. Now, to some degree, this is again a thing that all people should have to some extent, that the people in your life, like if they want something really simple and small from you, merely kind of being aware of them is enough that you would do some small thing for them. And then there's sort of the deeper stuff like your car won't start and you have to call a mechanic, but you need a ride home, and there are the people you can call who can give you a ride home. And so there's like that level of being able to rely on people. But then there are, and this is where that idea of best friend sometimes gets used kind of like this. It's like almost like an adoptive brother. Because the thing is, like, your siblings are people whom you owe a very great deal. And like one of the things, like if a sibling, like if a brother dies, you have a responsibility to his wife and children to take them in and make sure that they don't go hungry, and then they're not, simply out in the cold being rained on. And that's a very, very strong relationship. And so there's a concept of best friend, which is like a very extreme version of that English version of mate, or like the older idea of comrade, of a person where you almost like owe a surrogacy to, where if they can't fulfill their primary obligations, you would step in as a surrogate to fulfill it for them, and vice versa. And so this sort of thing, it's sort of like an adoptive brother, and that is also sometimes used to describe the relationship of best friend. That that people have this idea that the best friend is somebody where you have that relationship with them. So, if that is the thing that one is going for, if the thing that you're going for is that level of comradeship, of being sort of an adoptive brother, that's something that a husband and wife can't, in one sense, straight up are doing. For example, the two of them have the strongest possible bond and relationship to their children. So if something happens to the husband, the wife has to take care of the children. If something happens to the wife, the husband takes care of the children. And so in one sense, they already have that. And in a very full sense, because, but it's not a stepping in place of, it's you have this obligation shared together anyway. But there is a sense in which they can't be this for several reasons for each other. One of which being that the wife is the person towards whom the husband has the greatest obligations. And so having her as the surrogate for him doesn't do her any good. So, like, if the husband were to get, if he were to get run over by a wagon, or hit by a bus using modern technology, or struck by lightning, or whatever the heck it is, it doesn't do her any good that she will stand in place of his obligations, because she's the one towards whom most of his obligations were. So having somebody other than himself who can step in and make sure she will be taken care of to at least some degree in the amount that he himself was supposed to take care of her is something that's, it's a good idea. It's something to be desired, especially, in a dangerous world and so on. That's very helpful. And this is where it's very hard for that. It makes more sense in general for that person with whom someone has that kind of reciprocal bond of obligation where you will be a surrogate for the other, if that person is most able to take care of your particular responsibilities within the relationship. And so that it is, it would be possible here for that to be with a woman to some extent, for a man to have that with a woman, where if he gets hit by a bus, she'll come and help take some amount of care of the wife and her children. But the thing is, there doesn't exist the complementarity there. So, to use a very trivial example, simply because it's really clear, that like a woman who's the same size and generally the same strength can't come and like lift the heavy things for her. If there's some heavy sort of grunt work for which you would typically want a man, and very typically it's the women who want the men. Just speaking as a man, a lot of women really, really, really have a very strong preference when it comes to like picking up big heavy things overhead to have some man to do it. Yeah. So it's not to say that other women can't. They just have a very strong preference. I've noticed that. And so a woman would have trouble fulfilling that, for example. Whereas if you form that relationship with another male, then he would be able to step in and fulfill those sorts of things. The, stereotypical taking out the trash and the carrying of heavy things and so on. So if that is the sort of thing that is being described, if that's what Charles Maine had in mind, then yes, it is a modern degenerate idea for the man to have as his surrogate in life the person towards whom he has most of his primary responsibilities, because she's going to be stuck on her own taking up his work anyway if something were to happen to him and he can't do it. And so he's not really providing any sort of surrogate to fulfill his duties in that circumstance. This is it's degenerate because it's taking this idea, but it's not understanding what the purpose of it is. And so not having those sorts of bonds with people outside of the immediate family. So in some sense, what I'm describing is that the nuclear family, as people tend to call it, is sort of a degenerate idea. To some degree, that whole, it takes a village to raise a child thing. There's a lot that's wrong with that sentiment, but it is certainly not good for man to be alone. And, expanding that past the woman, it's good to have some extended support because things happen to us and we're not able to take care of ourselves all throughout everything. And having people who can step in for us is good. And so that, insofar as that tweet meant that, then I think there is something to it, because it is criticizing that nuclear family, autonomous nuclear family idea. That that idea that the man and the woman should be like essentially like have a joint solipsism going on, where the two of them together will be the only things in existence and ignore everything else and have no bonds outside of this. And that's really a bad idea. Like they should have bonds outside of their marriage to other people, and other people should be able to help, and they should be helping other people. It should not be sort of a two-person solipsism, in a contradiction in terms, but so to the degree that it's referring to that, that is true. Now, and this is getting back to the previous thing I was saying, on the other hand, to the degree that it simply is referring to friendship and not to mutual dependence, because obviously a husband and wife are mutually dependent. There's no way on God's green earth you can possibly have a functioning marriage in which the husband and wife are not mutually dependent upon each other. You can have phenomenally dysfunctional marriages in which that's the case, but not functioning ones, and especially not ones with children. So, in the other meaning, though, of friendship, in the more basic meaning of friendship, that doesn't have that sense of the mutual obligation of support, but rather the two people loving a third thing together. Now, husband and wife don't need to be friends among natural things this way. So they don't need to both love fly fishing or woodworking or raising flowers or breeding rabbits or falconry or whatever. Among all the things in creation there are to love, they don't need to be friends in this sense. It can be helpful. And there's certainly nothing wrong with being friends in this sense. There are good things about being friends in this sense. People will sometimes object essentially if they're overly friends. If they're friends in the sense to a tremendous degree, however, there can be a greater temptation to that sort of two-person solipsism that simply by taking away all the time they have to spend with other people, where they don't form these mutual bonds of interdependence with other people, because friendship is one of the things that helps to nourish those bonds of interdependence. So to the degree that this is exclusive of having bonds with people outside of the marriage, yeah, that would still be a modern degenerate idea, because that sort of two-person solipsism thing is a modern degenerate idea. However, there is a very traditional sense in which the husband and wife really should be best friends in this sense, in that sense of friendship, using best friends meaning simply to be the two friends who love each other the most. If you were to sort of, metaphorically speaking, weigh the amount of love for each. And that is because all human beings are meant to love God. And friends love God together. If you and somebody else love God together, you are together friends in this way. You are appreciating the goodness of God. You are loving the goodness of God together. You are sharing this, and this is enlarging the two of you and deepening your love for God. And husband and wife absolutely should be best friends in this sense, and that is a phenomenally traditional sense in which they should be friends. The husband and the wife should together be helping each other to be saints, helping each other to get to heaven, using the somewhat quaint terminology. But they very much should be best friends in this sense, because these are the two people who have more than any other influence on each other, helping each other to be the saints they're supposed to be. This, by the way, and you can see, incidentally, that this is a very ancient idea for the simple reason that since it so often does not work out, St. Paul gave the advice that it is better to not marry than to marry, because, why did St. Paul say it is better to not marry than to marry? Because the husband will be so concerned with his wife and the wife so concerned with her husband that they will forget God. And so, it is better not to marry, because then you can just devote yourself entirely to God. But, as he pointed out, it is much better to marry than to do things like, say, fornicate. So, if you're not, St. Paul's advice, and he himself, he qualified it sufficiently. This wasn't an absolute thing, but he was pointing out there is very much, at least in this way. I'm not saying, by the way, that St. Paul qualified it as, like, I'm only talking about in one particular dimension. At the same time, if you read St. Paul, though he speaks in a sort of absolute way, you can tell St. Paul was a genius, not an idiot. And so He was not denying the goodness of the body, for example, that God himself took up, nor was he denying that the cooperation with God and the creation of new people was a good. He was talking about a particular and trusting his audience to not be idiots, and therefore to understand that when he talks about one particular dimension of the problem, that he's talking about that dimension of the problem. And it's a very big dimension of the problem. I'm not saying it was merely a metaphor when he said that it's better not to marry. The idea of remaining celibate and devoted purely to the kingdom of God is a good one, which you can see in things like within the Roman Rite, the celibate clergy, and you can see in all traditions of having celibate monks and nuns. Christian tradition of celibate monks and nuns is ancient, absolutely ancient, and a good thing. This is a real thing. St. Paul was not kidding; he wasn't joking. But neither was he laying down an absolute law, saying that the only purpose of marriage is if you're too weak to not marry. As I said, his phrasing was not with lots of caveats, but that's not the way St. Paul typically wrote. He was, more brief than anticipating every way that everyone could possibly go wrong when they are not trying to read him sensibly. Point being, the idea that the husband and the wife should help each other to love God and not hinder each other to love God is a very, very ancient idea. Because, of course, if they actually do help each other in this fashion, you get something really magnificent as a result. And clearly, if these are your two options, hinder loving God, helping loving God, one of these two options is the good one of these two options is the bad one. So this is a sense, very much so, in which a husband and wife absolutely should be best friends. And so, what do we make of these tweets? Well, it depends on what was meant. If it's meant that the husband and wife should not form a sort of like two-person solipsistic bubble in which they live without any sort of dependence or helpfulness outside of their little bubble, then yeah, that sort of nuclear family idea is very much, the nuclear family and only the nuclear family sort of idea is a very recent one, and it is a very degenerate idea. It's a very bad idea for a whole variety of reasons. There are others, including that, it's really, really easy to go wrong this way, simply due to human weakness. That you can get tired of people, and if you have no refuge from the other person, if you can never take a break, if you can never effectively go on retreat, just to get away for a bit, to give each other breathing space because you're both fallen human beings, that carries with it a lot of dangers. And so, yeah, there are tons of problems in this if you take it that way. And if that tweet means that there are tons of problems with a husband and wife depending only on each other and having no real relationship to anything outside of their marriage, except, possibly their children, depending, that is a modern degenerate idea, and it's a very, very bad one. On the other hand, if it's denying that a husband and wife should be best friends in the sense of they should love God together and they should, with each other, more than any other human beings, share that love of God, well, then that's quite wrong, because the husband and wife have an enormous amount to do with each other, an enormous amount of mutual dependence upon each other, spend a lot of time together, and also for each one, the pleasing of the other is a tremendous concern, just unavoidably so. And so the degree to which each is the pleasing of the other is a tremendous concern, means that they absolutely should be the people who most share this direction of the two of them together to the worship of God, to the love of God, and as such should be best friends in that sense. And so I can see very much why Blake was uneasy with this tweet, because Twitter being a zero context environment, we don't know what either of these people meant. They could both be right and misunderstanding each other and not actually contradicting each other. They could both be wrong and misunderstanding each other and not contradicting each other. And lots of other possibilities too, where one's right and the other's wrong. And so I want to be very clear, I'm not ascribing any particular meaning to either of these two people. But here I think is the way to understand how can they both be right, how can they both be wrong, and Hopefully they were both right, and I hope this helps. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.